The mysterious flute in the dark forest. This happened a few years ago, back when I was 18 and finishing my senior year of high school. I live in San Antonio, Texas, and while things are usually lively around here, back then the whole world was shutting down due to the pandemic. Like everyone else, I was mostly confined to my home, and soon, the boredom got the best of me. I'd always been into urban exploring, visiting abandoned places, and checking out haunted locations. The thrill of being in creepy, forbidden spots felt like an escape from the monotony. So, when everything else was closed, I turned my attention to local places that still had some mystery left to explore. One night, I decided to visit O.P. Schnabel Park, a large, heavily wooded park here in San Antonio. During the day, it's a popular spot with hikers and families, but at night, well, it has a completely different reputation. The park has some dark stories. In 2016, a young woman named Lauren Bump was tragically murdered there, and just recently, a boy exploring the woods was shot. Despite this, the danger only added to the allure for me. I've never been one to scare easily. I was talking to a girl named Clarissa at the time. She and I weren't super close yet, but I somehow convinced her to come along with me. I figured we'd just go exploring for a bit, get a thrill, and head back. She was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed, and we ended up at the park around 3 a.m., armed only with our phones and a weak flashlight. When we arrived, the silence was immediate. Not just regular nighttime silence, but the kind that feels like everything around you is holding its breath. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just dead quiet. The trees were so dense that they blocked out nearly all the moonlight, leaving us in almost complete darkness. I didn't mind it. In fact, I preferred keeping the flashlight off. I'd rather let my eyes adjust to the dark and stay undetected if there was anyone else around. We started walking the main trail. About 15 or 20 minutes in, I suggested taking a shortcut I knew of that would loop back to where we'd parked. Clarissa agreed, and we veered off the main trail, heading into an even darker and narrower path. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we heard it. A faint flute playing in the distance. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but the look on Clarissa's face told me she'd heard it too. We stopped, listening, trying to make sense of it. The sound was soft, melodic, almost hypnotic, but there was something off about it. It didn't match the calm of the woods. Instead, it felt like it shouldn't be there, like it was out of place in the quiet wilderness. I could feel Clarissa's fear mounting beside me. She started whispering prayers, clutching her hands tightly, her voice shaking. I wasn't exactly scared at first, just curious, maybe a bit uneasy. I wanted to believe it was someone playing a prank, or maybe a musician practicing alone in the woods, but then the tune changed. It got louder, more intense, and somehow it felt like it was getting closer. I whispered to Clarissa, "It's probably nothing, just someone messing around." But as the flute continued, we both knew it didn't feel right. The way the music floated around us, it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. It seemed to surround us, filling the entire forest. The more I listened, the more it felt wrong. And then, without any warning, something darted across the path just a few feet in front of us. It was so fast I barely caught a glimpse, just a blur of motion. I froze, and my heart started pounding. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a deer. But something felt off about it. The way it moved, the strange heaviness I felt in its presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary animal. Clarissa looked at me, eyes wide with terror. I grabbed her hand and said, "Let's get out of here." We turned and started running back down the trail, hoping to get to the main path and back to the truck. But just as we thought we were putting some distance between us and that strange music, the flute started playing again, louder this time. It was as if it was right behind us. We didn't look back. We just ran, our footsteps echoing through the forest. I couldn't tell if the flute was actually following us or if the sound was playing tricks on us, but it felt as though it was chasing us, getting closer with each passing second. In the dark, every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle felt like it was reaching out to pull us back. At one point, we passed by a random, old porta potty on the trail. The thought crossed my mind. What if someone or something was hiding in there, waiting for us? But I pushed the thought away and kept running. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the parking area. My truck was the only vehicle there. I barely waited for Clarissa to get in before I started the engine and sped away. Neither of us said a word the entire ride back, both too shaken to process what had just happened. The next day, I tried to find any explanation online. I read stories about ghosts, cults, and strange animal noises, but nothing about a flute playing in the woods. I even asked around in some online forums, hoping someone had experienced something similar. But there was nothing. No legends, no warnings, no answers. The more I thought about it, the more I began to wonder if it was something paranormal. Maybe it was just someone playing a prank, or maybe it was something beyond explanation, something I wasn't meant to understand. To this day, I haven't returned to those woods at night. I still go exploring in other places, chasing that thrill. But there's something about that night, that music, that I just can't shake. It felt too real, too unnatural, and every time I think about it, I get that same chill down my spine, as if the forest is reminding me of the night I'll never forget. The Midnight Melody. It was the spring of 2020, a time when everything felt surreal. Schools were shutting down, businesses were closing, and the streets of San Antonio, Texas, were emptier than they'd ever been. I was 18, in my senior year of high school, and the world as I knew it was rapidly changing. With so much shut down, my friends and I found ourselves looking for ways to break the monotony. We started venturing out more, exploring places we'd never considered before. There was a strange freedom in roaming around at night, and for me, there was an extra thrill. I'd always loved exploring abandoned or eerie places, and my friends thought I was a bit crazy for it. But I didn't scare easily. I felt more alive in those moments than anywhere else. Around this time, I'd started talking to a girl from school named Clarissa. She was someone who could match my sense of adventure, and we clicked right away. We hadn't been dating long, but I knew she trusted me enough to join me on one of these nighttime excursions. So, one night, I convinced her to come exploring with me in a park not too far from where I lived. It was called Optionable Park, a place that was beautiful during the day, but had an unsettling reputation after dark. I picked her up around 2:30 a.m., and by 3, we were parked at the entrance of the park. The moonlight was faint, barely lighting up the trees, and the air felt thick with silence. We started down the main trail, flashlight off, just letting our eyes adjust to the dark. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional rustling in the bushes. We were both on edge, but in an exhilarating way. As we walked further into the trees, I suggested we take a narrow, off-road trail I'd found on a previous visit. Clarissa hesitated but agreed, and we turned off the main path. The deeper we went, the more isolated it felt, as if the rest of the world had vanished. We were about 5 minutes into this trail when I heard it, a faint melody, distant but unmistakable, coming from deeper in the woods. It was the sound of a flute. Clarissa and I stopped in our tracks, listening. At first, it was hard to tell if I was imagining it, but the melody was clear, smooth, and strangely calming. But in the silence of the forest, at 3 in the morning, it felt completely out of place. Clarissa grabbed my arm, her face pale, whispering, "Do you hear that?" I nodded, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It sounded like it was just beyond the trees to our left, maybe near the main trail we'd left. The melody grew louder, and I could feel Clarissa's grip tighten. The tune was haunting, almost hypnotic, and yet there was something unsettling in its rhythm. It felt as if it was pulling us in, drawing us closer. After a few seconds, Clarissa whispered, "Please, can we leave?" I wanted to tell her it was probably nothing, maybe just some musician or someone messing around, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I told her to stay close, and we started back toward the main trail. We hadn't taken more than a few steps when we heard something moving through the trees just in front of us. It was fast and silent, like a shadow gliding over the ground. Clarissa froze, whispering a quiet prayer under her breath. The flute stopped, leaving a chilling silence in its place. My heart was racing, every instinct telling me to get out of there, but I tried to stay calm for her. "We're okay," I whispered, squeezing her hand. "We'll just walk back, nice and easy." But as we turned, the melody started again. Only this time, it was right behind us, louder than ever, almost like it was mocking us. We didn't wait. We started running back to the main trail, and the flute kept playing, following us, somehow always staying just out of sight. The forest seemed darker, the shadows deeper, and every step felt heavier. I could feel my heart pounding as we reached the main path, sprinting faster than I ever thought possible. Somehow we made it back to the car, gasping for breath, hearts racing. I glanced back, expecting to see someone, anyone, in the distance. But the trees were silent, the melody gone, as if it had never existed. When I drove Clarissa home, we barely spoke, both of us lost in thought. Later, I scoured the internet, trying to find anything that could explain what we'd heard. But there was nothing about strange flutes in those woods, no reports of anyone haunting the area. I never went back to that park at night, and Clarissa and I never spoke about it again. Sometimes, I still wonder what we heard, what we might have seen if we'd stayed just a little longer. The unseen visitor at the pharmacy. Working the night shift can do strange things to a person. I was 20 years old, a pharmacy technician in a medium-sized hospital in northwest Alabama. My shift started at 6 p.m. and ended at 4 a.m., and I worked for 7 days straight before getting a week off. It was tough, but the extra days off felt like freedom. On one particular night, a Tuesday, I was on my 6th shift of the week. I was exhausted, having only caught about an hour or two of sleep after a long, hectic day. But I was used to pushing through, and my shift started out as usual. Around 2 a.m., I had to do my rounds, delivering patient-specific medications to the nurses' stations. There's a system for this on each floor, with the central hallway splitting into 2 wings on either side. I had my earbuds in, playing some soft music as I went about my work. The hospital was mostly silent at this hour, apart from the hum of machines and the occasional echo of footsteps in the distance. The dimly lit hallways and sterile smell added to the eeriness. I'd gotten used to it, though. When you work nights, you have to. But something about that night felt different. There was a heavy, almost charged atmosphere in the air, like the kind before a thunderstorm. My first stop was the surgery room, where I had to restock some medications. I wheeled my cart down the hallway, and as I reached the door, I heard the faint squeak of the door's hinges. The sound was loud in the silence, and I assumed someone had come in behind me. I turned to greet whoever it was, but there was no one there. The door had swung open by itself, or so it seemed. I shrugged it off, maybe just a draft or a loose hinge. I thought. I continued working, moving further down the hall to another room. As I entered, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a figure hunched over by the medicine cart in the corner. It looked like someone was rummaging through the sharps bin. We'd had an issue before with people looking for unused needles, so my first reaction was annoyance. I was about to confront them when I flipped the light switch, and no one was there. The room was empty. I took a step back, my skin prickling. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I was just seeing things. I hadn't slept well, and sometimes exhaustion plays tricks on you. But as I moved to the next room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around 3 a.m., I started my usual medication run to the patient floors. Each floor had a similar layout, with the nurses' stations near the elevator and patient rooms down quiet corridors. I made my way to the 5th floor, one of the emptier ones, where only a few rooms were occupied that night. It was dead silent, even more than usual. As I walked down the hallway, I felt a strange chill, like the temperature had suddenly dropped. I tightened my jacket and kept going, glancing around nervously. Suddenly, I heard footsteps echoing behind me, slow and deliberate, matching my own. I stopped in my tracks, and the footsteps stopped too. I turned, fully expecting to see someone there, but the hallway was empty. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just the sound of my own footsteps echoing, but something about it felt off. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but I forced myself to finish my rounds. When I got back to the pharmacy, I felt a little better, the familiarity of the space calming my nerves. I sat down at my desk to take a quick break, scrolling through my phone. As I relaxed, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps, closer this time. My heart started pounding as I looked up. The hallway outside was empty, but the footsteps didn't stop. They seemed to be coming from somewhere down the hall, slowly making their way toward me. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the silent pharmacy, until they suddenly stopped right outside the door. I stared at the doorway, half expecting someone to step into view. Seconds ticked by, but no one appeared. I wanted to get up, to check the hall, but a sense of dread kept me glued to my seat. I wasn't sure what I'd see if I looked. Then, as if sensing my fear, the door handle rattled. I held my breath, watching as it twisted slightly, then stopped. The silence that followed was almost louder than the footsteps had been. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what was happening, but I couldn't. Just when I thought it was over, I heard a faint whisper. It was so quiet. I could barely make it out, but it sounded like someone calling my name. Jason. The voice was soft, almost pleading, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I grabbed my stuff, hurried out of the pharmacy, and practically ran to the security office. I told the guard on duty what had happened, hoping he'd have some logical explanation. He listened, nodding, but he didn't seem surprised. When I finished, he leaned in a grim expression on his face. "You're not the first person to see or hear something unusual during the night shift," he said. "A few years back, there was a man who worked here in the pharmacy. He passed away suddenly, and some say his spirit still lingers, going through his nightly routine. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself it was just a ghost story. But every time I work a night shift, I still hear those footsteps. And sometimes, just sometimes, I feel like there's someone standing right behind me." Whispers in the woods. In 2019, I embarked on a journey of independence, living alone for the first time in Asheville, North Carolina. At 22, fresh out of college, I was thrilled to explore my new surroundings. I found a cozy apartment in downtown Asheville, where everything I needed was within walking distance. But it was the hiking trails that truly captivated me. One crisp October Wednesday, with vibrant autumn leaves all around, I decided to visit DuPont State Forest. The rain from the previous week promised a spectacular sight at the waterfalls, Triple Falls and High Falls. I packed my gear, excited for a day of exploration. Upon arriving at the parking area, I felt the serenity of the forest wrap around me as I set off on the trail. It was a perfect day. I was alone, and the quietude of the woods was soothing. After a short hike, I reached Triple Falls, a breathtaking sight famous for its appearance in the Hunger Games. I took videos and pictures, reveling in the beauty of the cascading water. But then, I noticed her, a woman standing in the distance, watching me intently. She had short, greyish-blonde hair and a mysterious presence. Trying to be friendly, I waved at her, but she simply turned and walked deeper into the woods. I shrugged it off, continuing my hike toward High Falls. When I arrived at High Falls, the sense of solitude was interrupted again. There she was, the same woman, staring at me once more. This time, I pretended not to notice and focused on my phone. But when I dared to glance up again, she had vanished into thin air. Continuing down the trail, I reached a covered bridge and paused to take in the scenery. Suddenly, there she was again, standing at the end of the bridge, watching me with the same unsettling intensity. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I approached her, asking if she needed help, but she turned and walked away at an unnaturally quick pace. With a growing sense of unease, I decided to head back. As I made my way down the trail, I tried to shake off the strange encounters. I passed a few other hikers, sharing a laugh about my odd experience, but the woman lingered in my mind like a shadow. Later that evening, I went on a date with a girl I had been seeing. We enjoyed pumpkin spice beers and shared stories, and I mentioned the mysterious woman on the trail. We both laughed it off, but that night, as I lay in bed, the sense of unease returned. I awoke suddenly in the darkness, feeling an inexplicable dread. As I looked up, my heart sank. I saw the figure of the woman standing at the foot of my bed. Panic surged through me, and I screamed, a primal sound that echoed in the stillness of the night. In the days that followed, my love for hiking was tainted by fear. The woman in the woods had left an indelible mark on my spirit, a haunting reminder that sometimes, even in the quietest places, unsettling mysteries can hide just out of sight.